it was, I think the hard, like, I guess the good thing about all that was that now I know that even if I have nothing in the end, like, even if I were to lose everything that I've built over the last 30 years, since we immigrated, I would still be okay. Because at the end of the day, money is important, but it is not the most important thing. As long as we have our health, as long as we have each other, that's what really matters. You want to have good people in your life, people that you can rely on. You're like your spouse, your partner, your kids, your siblings. That's really what matters. So I think for me, the lesson in all that was like, we can always build it all up. We can always earn more money, but it's the people that matter the most.
Sugar Daddy Podcast, yo. Learn how to make them pockets grow. Financial freedom's where we go. Smart investments, money flow.
Hey, babe, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about one of our favorite topics, which is raising children that are financially responsible, financially aware, and hopefully really wealthy. Because we always joke that we are trying to build trust fund babies without them being the stereotypical trust fund baby. But we want them to have the wealth of a trust fund baby. So this is going to be an exciting
The wealth
conversation.
and the wealth of knowledge as well.
There you go. But we have an expert with us today. We have Maya Corbic. She's all about raising wealthy children in the best way possible and really educating them in that process about money and finances and building wealth. So Maya, we are so excited to have you on the Sugar Daddy podcast with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited about today.
Yes, it's going to be a great conversation. We met Maya at FinCon, and if you follow us on socials, all you saw for several days was just FinCon, 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 everything. We went to dinner, I think it was the first night, and just totally hit it off. We were like, you have to be on the podcast. We love what you're doing. We were already following you because your information that you put out for parents is so fantastic and easy to understand. That's the point that I think is really important, is that everything that you share with your audience is really easy to comprehend and implement. You were going to say something.
I was just going to simply say, for those that don't know what FinCon is, it's a conference for finance content creators.
Money nerds.
Yeah, basically.
Yes, money nerds unite. So let's get into Maya's bio so everybody understands the knowledge that she's going to bring to this conversation, because it's going to be a good one. Maya Corbic is a CPA by trade and is the author of the children's book, From Piggy Banks to Stocks, The Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. And she's the founder of the Wealthy Kids Investment Club. Her popular Instagram account, Teach Kids Money, has over 160,000 subscribers and inspires parents to raise financially independent kids. Her work has been featured in CBS News, NBC, ABC, Fox. Girl, you got all the acronyms. You've been doing a lot. Thank you for being with us today, because we know your time is very precious.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So we like to kick off all of our guest episodes with understanding your first money memory. Do you have one for us?
I do, actually. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a weird one, but I was maybe 7 or 8, and I wanted to buy my mom Mother's Day gift. So I come from Bosnia, which used to be part of former Yugoslavia. It was a communist country, and we actually didn't have Mother's Day. We celebrated International Women's Day, which now everybody celebrates. It's March 8th. So for us, that was Mother's Day, and I wanted to get her a gift, but I had no money. And I don't know where my dad was. Maybe he was on a business trip or somewhere, and I couldn't ask him. So I had to ask my mom for money. And I remember not liking the feeling of not having any money of my own, but wanting that money to spend on something that was important to me. And so I asked her for money, and my mom didn't want to give me any, but I was begging her and begging her. And in the end, she kept on asking me, she's like, what is it for? And I said, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. And in the end, of course, I told her, and she gave me money, and I ended up buying this. It was just a little cute ceramic box in a shape of an apple. It was not a box, like a container in a shape of an apple, where she could store her jewelry or her rings. And I remember eyeing it before that for a couple of weeks in the store that was close to where we lived, and I just thought it was so adorable, and I thought she would really like it. And in the end, she gave me the money, and I got that for her, and she had it for a very long time. But just the feeling of not having money of my own was very discouraging to me, and very. I guess I just felt I really, I think from that moment on, I knew I wanted to have my own money. I wanted to not have to ask for someone's permission to buy something that I wanted or that was important to me.
As a kid, was money talked about in your household?
Not really. I think I kind of grew up with a poor mindset, not abundance mindset when it comes to money. My parents, before the war in Bosnia, before we immigrated and lost everything, I think we were middle class and we lived okay. My mom always used to say that money was very hard to come by, that you had to work extremely hard. And so they built those good work habits in me. But my mom was also very good at like budgeting the money, but my parents never invested. They didn't have credit cards. And not to mention, they didn't talk about any sorts of passive streams of income or entrepreneurship. That wasn't even on their radar. So I learned a lot by observing. And I learned even more so by observing once we immigrated and we had to live in government shelters and government housing. My mom had to be very creative to stretch that dollar and make sure that it goes as far as it possibly could, because at one point we were on welfare and we had absolutely nothing. So I was very good, I think, at budgeting and stretching the dollar, which I think I still am, but I lacked all these other skills. And the skills that I picked up by watching. But the rest of it, I kind of had to learn on my own through the books, through podcasts like yours, TV shows, YouTube, and stuff like that.
Being an immigrant and coming from, maybe middle class to then coming to the United States. This was when you immigrated to the United States, not Canada, right?
No, I was actually in Canada. In Canada, yeah.
Ah, okay. So from Bosnia to Canada and then totally changing kind of economic classes. What do you remember that being like as a child? So you have these vivid memories of seeing your parents stretch the dollar and obviously being motivated yourself to, sounds like, not want to have to do that, right, in your adult life. But what else do you remember being an immigrant, being in a new country, and kind of losing it all?
Yeah, losing it all was very challenging. And I know my parents before the war, they had an opportunity to come to Canada and they chose not to because, as strange as it may sound, and even though the standard of living is better in North America, Canada, and America, United States included, some people don't want to leave. They're just happy living where they live, right? And so when my parents came, it was terrifying because I was almost 15, and I have a younger brother. He's 5 years younger, and my parents, they had to start from scratch. My mom is a chemical engineer and a computer programmer, and my dad had a Bachelor of Economics, and they didn't speak English. None of us spoke English. So not only that it was a culture shock, we had to learn English. We had no connections. We didn't know anyone. We had to be on welfare. On top of that, my dad, much, much later on, was diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder because of the war and what we experienced, or mostly what he experienced, but we've all experienced things. So, but it's just affected him the hardest. So it was very hard to start all of a sudden living normal life when you have these mental health issues. And that caused my parents to split up, and my mom and my brother and I ended up in a shelter for women and children. It was just really bad. But it was, I think, the hard, like, I guess the good thing about all that was that now I know that even if I have nothing in the end, like even if I were to lose everything that I've built over the last 30 years since we immigrated, I would still be okay. Because at the end of the day, money is important, but it is not the most important thing. As long as we have our health, as long as we have each other, that's what really matters. You want to have good people in your life, people that you can rely on. You're like your spouse, your partner, your kids, your siblings. That's really what matters. So I think for me, the lesson in all that was like, we can always build it all up. We can always earn more money, but it's the people that matter the most.
I always I always appreciate that perspective because I'm fortunate enough that I didn't have a tough upbringing by any means. Grew up, in the United States, middle class, upper middle class, never had to worry about going without. And so I didn't have to have that mindset of I've had nothing. So going back to nothing doesn't scare me because in all honesty, I've always had a pretty good life. So like certain aspects of losing it all is scary to me because I haven't had to experience that. And that is one thing that I've, noticed through some people that I know that have experienced similar aspects of life growing up that you've experienced where you've had it rough and you had to pull yourself up by I'm not going to say bootstraps because you didn't even have bootstraps. You had to,
I didn't.
yeah, you had to do it all yourselves. And I'm just as somebody that sees that, like, I'm just saying, I don't even have words for it really. I admire it, and admire is not a
But you
good
can be
word,
really
but
empowering.
yeah, I admire like that ability because I think when you've like I said when you've been through what you've been through, the sky's the limit because you don't have the same fear that I have because you've already done things that I've never had to do. If that makes any sense, I'm not as good with words as Jess is.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm like, it totally makes sense, but I think the fear that you have is the fear of the unknown. But the unknown is, it's bad in a way, but not really. Like I felt that, the bad things were like, I was actually just thinking about that, and I was kind of going through some things, and I was writing in my journal. Sometimes I just use my journal to kind of like, just get stuff out of my head. And I remember being embarrassed to bring people into our house or not even a house. We had an apartment when we first moved here. And I remember one time one of my friends came over, and I just saw the look on her face, and she looked around and she's like, "Oh, this is cute." And I knew what that meant. She was like, I think she was just shocked, like where I lived and how I lived. And because outside of the home, you couldn't tell. Like I had two part-time jobs, I dressed nice. And actually, my room was really nice. I bought my own furniture, I bought myself a computer, I bought like all these things. I decorated my room, I painted it, but I couldn't control the rest of the household, right? So she only saw what she knew. And then when she actually saw the rest of the house or the apartment, she was kind of like, oh. But, anyways, I guess what I want to say is like, it seems daunting. And I think there would be like a big bruise to the pride if, for example, for me, if I lost everything that I've built. But at the same time, there is some freedom in it because it's kind of like, well, I've got nothing. So I'm free to explore. And okay, what's the next step? Like, how are we going to do this? It could be exciting. And also, I find that I was a lot more creative when I had less because now it's just easier. Oh, I can just spend money. Like, I'm doing this challenge. I'm going to be doing this challenge with my daughter to teach her about budgeting, and I'm going to use our front porch as a way to do that. So I've asked my Instagram community to give us a budget, and they give us like $50 to decorate the front porch. And so $50 it's not a lot, but I know I can do it even on a cheaper, and it just kind of requires me to be more creative, and to, when I have less money, it really forces me to, I don't know, have more fun with it, and really find ways to like tackle this and like make this look like, I don't know, $200 decoration versus something that you spend $50 on.
I think for me, I think one of the things that like I've thought about through my entire life is that, like I said, I was fortunate enough in my upbringing that I should be successful in life because of what I've had afforded to me growing up. And the fear of not being successful is more or less that because there's no reason for me not to be. Because you have individuals that have had significantly harder lives than I have, and they've become successful. So with the tools that I have, I should be. So I think that's kind of like what I think through in my own personal life, in my head.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I feel I totally understand what you're saying. And I sometimes feel that I have put some sort of expectation like that onto my own children because I feel that they're growing up privileged. They have had experiences and possessions that I could have only dreamed of when I was their age. And sometimes I feel guilty as a parent that I've put that sort of expectation on them because I always tell them, when I was an immigrant, I was hungry. I was hungry for success. I was hungry for better life. And that hunger just keeps you going. Like it makes you really try harder, and they don't have to try as hard. And in some ways, I just think that maybe it's okay to let our kids be content. And what's success? Like success is just a definition of, everybody has a different definition of it, right? So my definition can be very different from my kids definition. Maybe someone's definition is to just be who they are. Like, why do they have to reach for more if what they do right now makes them happy? If they reach for more and they're constantly stressed out, burnt out, they don't have time for family and friends, then like what's the point of that? Just so the society can approve of us, like that may
That's
not
probably
necessarily be the right thing.
That's probably a hard thing too in regards to like first generation immigrants, because the few friends that we have that are first generation, you kind of do have that back and forth between their parents, that came over here and didn't have anything, and then them growing up with a lot more than their parents ever had. So I think that's just a common theme.
But then when you have abundance, doing what you're trying to do, Maya, and we're going to get into that, is like teaching your children the financial responsibility, but then also to be grateful, right? Because we always joke, we're like, we don't want to raise spoiled brats, but they're spoiled. We just don't want them to be brats, like how do you make sure that they're appreciative and grateful, but then also, to your point, find that contentment? Because constantly, that hustle culture, that grind it out. I mean, when you have to, because you're on welfare and you're in the shelter and you're like, this cannot be our life, that's one thing. But if you have a good life and you've been given, the tools and resources, you also have to find contentment in just being, right? And I think especially for us in that millennial space, you're constantly go, 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 do, do, do. You have these big aspirations. And then, I feel guilty if I watch a movie and I'm not folding laundry at the same time, or I'm not checking emails at the same time. It's like, you also have to learn how to rest and just to be and be content and be grateful and kind of pause and sit in that as well, without the hustle and bustle and grinding it out constantly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm with you. I feel guilty every time I am, as you said, like if I'm just watching a movie without doing laundry or cooking or something, I feel guilty. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
really want that for my kids. I want
No.
them to understand and know that rest is important. And I think, this is going to sound really weird, but I think only a couple of years ago, I actually learned that I should be resting, like other than
Yeah.
sleeping, and that resting is okay. I
And
mean,
you don't have to earn it.
yes,
You don't
yes,
have to earn rest. Yes. I'm
yes.
still learning that.
I think that's also probably very hard for a working mom.
Yes, I think so
I
too.
think men maybe have a little. I don't say maybe, we do have a little bit easier when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to that aspect. But I feel most moms, especially working moms, feel guilty. So like, there's something
There's
I could
always
be doing,
something to do. Yeah, there's always something to get
because I
done.
have to tell Jess numerous times, like, Jess, just stop.
I know.
It'll get done later. You need a rest.
It's hard.
Right, because otherwise you can just keep going, right?
Yeah. Maya, let's switch into, you immigrated, you ended up living with your mom and your brother, you were on welfare in the shelters. How did you go from that to being a CPA? What's that journey?
Yeah, so um, I think for me personally, uh, the traditional schooling was the way out of poverty. And, being on social media, and I know both of you are, and you have your Instagram account, and there are a lot of people out there that, they talk badly about 9 to 5 and, going to school, getting good education, getting good grades, getting a great job. And there, I think there's a time and place for everything. And for me, that was my salvation. That was my way of getting out because I didn't have the education. I did not know much about entrepreneurship. I didn't know much about passive income streams or anything like that. Maybe I could have done stuff like that. But to me, all I knew was that if I go to school and I get good grades, I can get into one of the top universities. And then from there, I can hopefully continue my education and then get a job at a really good company. And that's what I did. And that really helped me, you know, increase my earning power and become a CPA. And it wasn't a straight journey. I was really all over the place. I thought I was going to end up in sciences. Um, my choice of or my career pursuit was strictly based on my financial need. I did consider what I like, but that was second to kind of thinking like, okay, what's going to make me the most money that's going to help me get out of where I am. And so I did consider becoming a dentist and I did a dental co-op. I didn't like that. I thought about becoming a doctor and we dissected a rat in biology class and I was like, oh, absolutely not. And then I think at one point I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an engineer, electrical engineer. And I went into an open house. It was all men and machines. And I was like, okay, this is not me either. And my friend was going into business. So I just ended up there. And then I learned that becoming a CPA, like a lot of times, like a lot of the accounting companies, they'll pay for your further education to get your CPA designation. And I was like, this is awesome. I want them to do that for me. And when they pay for it, you have to sign on that you're going to be with them for a couple of years. And I'm like, this is awesome. That just means I'm going to have a job for the next 2 years.
Right.
So I was like, why wouldn't I do this? So they paid for my education. I had a job and my salary kept on increasing. And I was actually able to use the money that I earned. So my husband and I, we paid off our mortgage and all of our debts, like student loans and such, by the time I was 32. So we were debt free. And then I was able to quit corporate world and start my own thing. So it really worked out.
That's amazing.
So where's your husband from?
He is from Serbia.
Okay.
Yeah, from former Yugoslavia as well.
Because I always wonder, like when you have those dynamics, especially if like you were to marry someone that had lived their entire life in Canada, like how that difference of growing up, can interact in a relationship.
Yeah, well, there is a difference because his family immigrated before the war, and his family immigrated with money. They had more money. They didn't immigrate directly; like they were actually living in other parts of the world. His parents are in medical field, and so they came with money. He had a much better life than I did. Um, his mom, his parents paid for his school. I had to take student loans, like so. It was very different, and it took a few years for him to understand what I was trying to do for us, to put us on a budget, to pay off all of our loans, to streamline our personal finances. And once he came on board, we became unstoppable. I think that dynamic of, like a couple that like has goals and they're on the same page, and it just really, really worked well for us. And so I think that's when we realized like we can accomplish so much more when we're working together and when we're on the same page. And he really started learning more about personal finance and investing and getting more interested in like what I guess what I even promote now, to my students.
That's amazing. Yeah, we always talk about, if you're pushing and pulling in different directions in your partnership, it's going to take you so long to go in the same direction.
If you even make it at all.
If you make it. So what you said about, being on the same page, because, something as big as let's pay off our house and let's be debt free and have no mortgage. I mean, you have to be on the same page to do that, because otherwise, unless you're a bajillionaire, I mean, it's not going to happen. You have to be aligned in your goals. And so are you two technically part of the FIRE movement?
I wouldn't say exactly like I didn't even know what fire was until I would say until maybe 6, 7 years ago.
Okay.
Um, I wish I did because maybe I would have jumped on it and be even more serious. But we've along the like we're going to be married for 20 years. It's going to be our 20-year anniversary next summer, and we just use common sense, I think. And our common sense was like, let's pay off our debt, our mortgage, and let's just kind of keep growing our wealth. But at the same time, let's try to have fun while we're doing that. So when we first started doing these kind of things, like we didn't have vacations like we have right now. Our vacations were mostly like camping in Canadian North, or we would go to Cuba. And for Canadians, Cuba's really, really cheap. Maybe not so much
Mm.
now, but back then that those were our vacations. And but now, that we're in a better financial place, those vacations are completely different. So we just kind of did what we could afford, and we really didn't overextend ourselves. We were really the underdog. And I think like when we paid off our house and when we did started doing certain things that were like outside of our norm, but it took so many years to get there, people were kind of like, they started paying attention. They were like, oh, like where did that come from? Like we thought you guys were like, they had no idea. And that's why, like, sometimes with personal finance, like you look at people and you have no idea who has got how much money just because they drive a certain car or live in a certain house. Like you don't know. You
I
don't
say that
know.
all the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I
Yeah.
feel like social media, that's one of the drawbacks I would say of social media is that everyone's showing you a highlight reel, and that highlight reel might not even be like reality at all in their life.
Yeah. I mean, now there's all these accounts popping up too of people showing you how, especially influencers they're renting their car for the day. They're renting the apartment to shoot content. They're literally buying designer bags, the actual like shopping bags off of Etsy and the internet. And they're just basically staging a life, right? And it's the people that we know that are the most wealthy. I mean, they're driving Honda Accords, they're driving Toyotas. They're not in flashy cars.
My
And
mom and
so,
her Nissan Rogue.
yeah, exactly. So, we see it very differently because we know how much debt people carry. And, Brandon obviously is a financial advisor. And so his thing is always, you don't know where people's money is coming from. That down payment for that house could have come from a grandparent. They could be, the grandparents could be paying for the fancy private school. I mean, unless you are in that person's bank account, you just don't know. And people are just showing you a highlight reel online. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, so my husband, he actually finished Bachelor of Economics, but he ended up going back to school to become a plumber. So he actually has his own plumbing and drains and waterproofing company. And to your point, he told me one time there was a problem at this. It's in a beautiful part of Toronto, beautiful mansion, luxury vehicles in front. These people had sewage in their basement, like things were backed up. And so he's like, I went in there because he doesn't do the work. He has people who do the work for him, but he sells. So he said, I walked in and he's like, man, I'm not even going in. He's like, this is gross. We need people to come clean this up. Like, and so he gave them a quote. And they're like, oh, here's our credit card. He tried charging it. It wouldn't go through. They were giving him all these other credit cards. Everything was not going through. Then he said, well, we can set you up with a company to approve you for a loan so that you can pay for this. They couldn't get approved. So
Wow.
they have sewage in their basement. They're driving these luxury vehicles. They live in this beautiful mansion, yet they cannot get approved to get sewage out of their basement and get that cleaned up and get their pipes changed and whatnot.
That puts things into perspective, and I think as we get older and as our goals change of the life that we want to live, it, we really don't care about cars. We really don't care about those material things. Yes, we want a nice, safe home, for our families and for game nights and of course to have security and shelter. But when it comes to those materialistic things, our view is just, it's just very different than what the internet tells you. Let's pivot into you got your education, you got your CPA, the company paid for it. Now you and your husband are working towards these big financial goals. Talk to us about your Instagram account and why focusing on kids and investing, and where did that fire and drive come from? Because you don't just wake up one day and then have 160,000 followers on Instagram. So that
Yeah.
takes some work and intentionality.
I wish it was that easy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it would be amazing. Yes,
Yeah.
no, it's definitely not that easy. But so 12 years ago, when I decided to quit my accounting job, I was actually a tax accountant at that point. I did some audit and then I was in tax. Uh, I wanted to do something meaningful that actually would matter to me. And I started teaching financial literacy. So I used to go to schools. I would teach grade kindergartens all the way up to grade 12 to high school. And then COVID hit. And of course, I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to transition my business to be completely online. And the way Instagram happened was really just a way for me to advertise and let people know, hey, this is what I do. And at the very beginning, it was really awkward because I felt it was really awkward to film myself and like put my face. It took me, I would say, a whole year before I started putting my face out there. Uh, I
It's
just
such a
thought
beautiful
that,
face.
no, thank you, but it just felt like, this like narcissistic person just putting herself out there, and like I just had to get over a lot of self criticism and some sort of fears of judgment and everything else. And now it's like it's second nature. I don't even think about it. But also, I had to learn about what it is that my followers wanted. And so I did talk a lot about allowance and how to teach kids to save and how to teach kids to budget. And as I said, I have two kids, they're teenagers now. And I've experimented a lot on them. They were my guinea pigs, and I kind of know what works, what doesn't. But also, like, because I've been working with other parents for the last several years, I also know what works for other parents. And I believe that there's no one set way to teach kids financial literacy. We can talk about that a little bit more after. But so I was teaching all these things, but then I started realizing that every time I would talk about investing, people started paying more attention. And this is like some 5 years, or no, actually maybe 3, 4 years ago, like nobody was talking about investing for kids. Nobody was talking about how powerful that could be. And I was like, well, I think this is what people need. So I was like, okay, let's talk about this. And once I started talking about it, I actually realized people are really paying attention. They were like signing up for my free classes, for my cheat sheets. And I think that's when other financial literacy influencers who don't teach kids and money, but then they started seeing how my account was growing. So they're like, oh, this is something we should start talking about too. So all of a sudden, like people started talking about it more and more, to the point now where actually one podcast that I was on and I subscribed to their newsletter, I actually just ended up getting an email from him, and he just had a daughter, and he was saying is like, in his newsletter, he's explaining how he's investing for his daughter. And I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I teach, like, in my on my Instagram, and like word for word. And I'm like, it seems that it's good. Like we've started a movement, like people are doing this, people find the value in it. And I'm so glad, because nobody talked about kids and investing years ago.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting too, because obviously we know in this finance space, in investing, the time is what matters most, right? So even if it's $5, $10, $50, whatever you can do, that consistent, like daily, weekly, monthly drip, whatever your cadence is, that's what's going to compound, when you start them with an investment account when they're a baby versus, when they're 30 or 40. So the time really makes sense to invest for your children.
Well, it's also shifting the conversation. So I can remember as a kid that the big thing was getting, savings bonds.
Mm.
You get the kids savings bonds when they're a kid, when in reality, what they should have just been doing is investing, but they didn't have the information. And obviously, the internet wasn't around. So they didn't know where to access this information. Where
Mhm.
now, for example, when I'm talking to clients and stuff with their kids, I'm like, unless your child is working and you guys need this money that they would be putting in a savings account for a kid doesn't make any sense. It's
Right.
like they're not going to use it. Don't put it in the savings account. Put it in, invest it, and it's going to grow significantly more by the time they become adults. So it's like I said, it's just
Mhm.
changing the conversation. I think people were on board for trying to do something for their child that's going to better their future, but now we just have better tools to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may say, you said something which I had a discussion about with I think my daughter, and we did not have internet back then. Internet was or is the game changer, and also social media accounts. Both of them can be bad, but they can also be very good. They've really raised awareness of financial literacy. And you know I remember, and I'm really dating myself, but in the 90s and early 2000s, we had just had books. I remember reading Rich Dad Poor Dad and Cash Flow Quadrant. Those two books, they opened my eyes. And now I see on social media people are criticizing those two books and they're saying all these horrible things. And I said, you know what? If it wasn't for those two books, I would have never ever understood passive income and how it works, because no one was talking about it in my realm, like, or in my sphere of influence, or in my circle. This is People who understood passive income were way wealthier than I was. They were not hanging out with people like me. But with, like, nowadays, yes, you have internet, so you can see reels and on social media, and you can learn about these things. But back then we didn't have that
Yeah.
information, and so we
Mhm.
did what we thought was the best, which was the savings account or savings bonds for kids. And in hindsight, like, why would we do that? That made no sense, but that's all we knew.
It's easy to criticize when you're doing hindsight. Like,
Right. I mean, you talk about
Yeah.
Rich Dad Poor Dad because,
yeah, those because like those were the books that opened up the pathway to where we are now when it comes to financial literacy.
Yes.
Like they were the forefathers, the starters of all those.
Yeah, yeah. And Robert Kiyosaki, love him or hate him, it doesn't really matter. To me, I owe him and I forget who the co-author is. Cheryl, I forget her name. I really apologize for that.
people
But
have the internet. They can look it up.
yeah, they can look her up. Actually, I didn't even know. We always talk about Robert Kiyosaki writing that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, but there was a co-author, and I met her. She's a lovely lady. And when
Mm.
I met her last year. I was a speaker at this conference, and so was she. And we spoke, and I had tears in my eyes. I said to her, "You changed my life
Wow.
because you opened my eyes to something that I didn't know. My parents couldn't teach me this. The school was not teaching me this, and there was no internet back then."
Hmm. So we will of course link all of your socials, and we want people to follow along with the great information that you're giving and the courses. And of course, you have a children's book. I mean, there's so many resources that you provide to your audience. But let's talk about, you have teenagers now. What is that discussion of money in your house now? Because I know I recently you posted a reel. I think your daughter wanted maybe some Uggs or some cute boots versus some other piece of clothing, and you made her, she had to decide she couldn't get both, or she needed to use her own money. And growing up, you said you guys didn't talk about money a lot. You obviously didn't have a lot. How did you want to change that for your kids and your family? And do you have suggestions for our audience on how to do that without it being scary and intimidating?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I don't want money to be taboo in my home. I want us to talk about it openly. I also think that eventually for my kids, that will translate to them talking to their partners openly about it. And hopefully to their friends. Maybe they can learn stuff from their friends, and their friends can learn stuff from my children. Um, but I think that if we talk to our kids about money, especially when they're younger, I think we have to be a little bit more mindful as to how much information can they take, and we don't want to scare them either. Like, if you're paying off your debt, or if you're worried whether or not you can pay the mortgage next month, like, maybe those are some things that you want to keep to yourself, because you don't want to scare them. But if, for example, you're paying off your debt, and your kids are a little bit older, you can say, "Hey, you know what? I didn't understand what that was. And I, have made some bad choices, maybe. But now I am trying to pay that off, and I'm trying to shift my life and our finances in a positive direction. And so these are the mistakes that I made and I don't want you to make. So, you can see what I'm doing and, how I'm paying off this debt, whatever method it is that that you're using. But if you have younger kids, it could be just a conversation like, when they ask you to buy them something, sometimes parents will say, oh, I can't afford it. That's not a good way to talk about money, because then you're encouraging the mindset of scarcity. So instead, if you can afford it, maybe the answer would be, I choose not to spend our money on this because you already have, let's say, that toy, or you know what, I choose to spend my money on something else that would bring you more joy. Or maybe the answer is, you know what, I choose not to buy this right now because I need to save up for it. And, here's the plan how we're going to do it. So it's about being open about it as much as we can, as much as our kids can handle, depending on their ages.
Yeah, we talk about that exact same thing, right? Not making money taboo, speaking openly about it. We have a 5 and a 6-year old. And, if it's, hey, you eat the bottom of the strawberry and then you throw the rest away and there's half a strawberry left. Hey, that pint of strawberries was $6. Remember how you got $20 for your birthday? What if I took 6 of that? And you only had a third of the strawberry. Is that wasteful? I mean, it's something, as simple as that. But I love what you said about mindset, because we recently spoke about that on a previous episode, where whether you have scarcity in your home or not, putting that scarcity mindset into your children of coming from that place of we don't have can be so limiting when you're an adult, right? So instead of saying we don't have money for that, saying we did, what you just said, we didn't budget for that, or we didn't plan for that, or that's not on our list for shopping today. Today we're only buying spaghetti and spaghetti sauce, right? Or phrasing it in a way that doesn't come from we don't have, instead of we're not choosing to spend money there. If we choose to spend money on this today, then maybe we can't spend money on XYZ tomorrow. And I think that mindset, the more we talk to people, the more we realize that what was instilled in us as children, it does follow us, and it does, in a lot of ways determine how we make choices as young adults or adults, as we grow up. So staying away from that scarcity mindset.
What I loved is you talking about the transparency of talking about mistakes that you have made with your children. I
Mm.
think, with our parents and, previous generations, it was always trying to portray like a perfect idea of being a parent, that I know everything, I have it all figured out. And that's, we as adults now and parents, we know that's not the case. And letting your kids know that, like,
We
mommy
don't
and
know
daddy don't have
everything.
it all figured out.
Yeah.
We're still trying to figure things out, and we've made mistakes and we're going to continue to make mistakes. But letting kids know at a young age that they don't have to be perfect, I think is going to change how they handle adversity as they get older.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
true.
100%. And I have, our son is going to be 18 next year. So I'm going to have an adult child, which is really unbelievable. But, sometimes like now he will ask me questions. He's like, oh, can I do whatever, X, Y, Z? And so, I mean, I could be the parent and be like, no, you can't do it or whatever. But I usually sit him down and I say, Daniel, here's how I see it. I don't know if this is the right way of seeing it, but this is what I think. You're going to be an adult, so you need to start practicing these adult decisions. It's up to you, dude, because if you choose to go, let's say this, if you choose this path, these are the consequences. You may choose a less fun path, and the consequences may not be as severe. But I say, I don't know which one's the right one for you. And I'm like, you just really need to exercise your your decision muscles and kind of decide on your own right now. Unless it's like something we haven't had a situation where it's like, oh my God, like I have to decide. But this is like some things like, oh, should I go out tonight? Can I go out with my friends, or like can I sleep over? But he has all these assignments due on Monday, and he actually wants to apply to like mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering next for to go to
Wow.
next year. So I'm like, well, those are, you need high grades for that. So I don't know. Like, yeah, you can go for a sleepover and you can party all night, but I don't know what's going to happen to your assignments. So you think about
Yeah.
it.
You're like, I've already got all my education. This is on you.
And
Yeah.
I honestly I honestly feel it's so great and undervalued that people don't do that with their kids, because I can recall, I always tell people, when I was in high school, I didn't have a curfew. And it wasn't because my mom didn't care and that I was going to be out at all, hours of the night. I knew what time to be home because my mom gave me the responsibility, and I learned very early on not to take advantage of that. And I was always home at a reasonable time. Because I also knew that if I wasn't home at a reasonable time, the locks might be changed. That car she pays for might be taken away.
There would be
So
consequences.
I had decisions to make.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I
absolutely.
always tell my kids, I tell them, when they bring their report card home and, some marks are like, they're both actually really good students. I should say that. But at the end of the day, my, my only question to them is like, are you happy? Do you think that you have done everything you possibly could to, like, in your power? Like, you worked as hard as you could, you did what you needed to do. Does this mark reflect that? And a lot of times they're going to be like, no, it doesn't. I could have tried harder. I'm like,
Right.
okay, well, that's all I want you to reflect upon, because really, like, right now their number one job is to study and try hard in school. They have other responsibilities, of course, too, but to me, I'm kind of like, just do your best. If you think you've done your best, then you know what? It is what it is. Let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. Going back to our earlier part of the conversation of like relieving some of that stress, right? Of being perfect, or you have to do this, or you have to go to this school, or be this kind of career person, or, it's just too much stress. Do you, Maya, have, and I know you're in Canada and we're in the US, so it might be a little different, but do you have, for somebody who's listening who maybe has young children or is expecting, maybe a favorite kind of account or investment or suggestion on how to get started with investing for your kids?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll speak to US side because I know that your audience is, I'm assuming, mostly in the US.
Yes. Yep.
So if they have a young child or if they're expecting a young child, I would open up the 529 plan. They can open it up in their own name, and I think they can transfer it later on to their child when the child is born. I love the 529 plan because even if the child decides not to pursue college later on, you can transfer those funds to another child or keep them for yourselves. But even better, you can transfer up to $35,000 into Roth IRA for that child. And the sooner they start investing, for that child, the more money that child will have in that account.
Yeah. We did an episode completely dedicated to 529s, especially because of the recent changes, like you mentioned, the Roth IRA and being able to transfer money. Because my concern was always, well, if the kids have scholarships or what if they choose not to? And so there's a lot of flexibility there now, which is great. Are there any other accounts or investments that you recommend?
I just love the custodial Roth IRA. That's just something that we don't have in Canada. And especially for parents who are entrepreneurs who are business owners, there is a great way to defer or to, save on taxes by employing their kids to
Hmm.
work for them. So even if your child is a baby, you can hire them to do, let's say, ads for you or commercials. And it's important to set this up properly so that you actually have a contract between you and your child. I would hire a lawyer and a tax accountant. It may cost you a lot more upfront, but once that's set up, once that's in place, you basically, whatever it is that you pay to your child, which has to be the right amount, whatever, let's say, somebody who does acting or promotions would earn. So you would pay them the same amount, but that's the amount that you can deduct from your profits from your business. And you're obviously going to save on taxes because your income is lower. And then there is a certain amount of money that out of that you can actually invest into custodial Roth IRA depending on annual maximums. And that's the money that can grow for them. And it's just, you can really make your kids millionaires easily in that way while you're also saving on taxes.
Yeah, we love that. And what you said is the reasonable amount, right? Like you can't pay them thousands of dollars to sweep the kitchen or your office or take out the trash.
Yeah, well, the thing in the US is more or less that there's a maximum amount that you could pay your kids, them being under 18 years old, that child, they wouldn't have to pay taxes on that income. And
Yeah.
that's what you're using to
Right.
contribute to those accounts.
Right.
Really nice. Well, Maya, this has been a great conversation. I love, that we talked a lot about mindset and just being open and honest with our children about money and finances. And like you said, past mistakes and how we want to help prevent them from making those mistakes and being vulnerable. I think not only with your partner, with your friends, like you mentioned, but definitely with your children is so important in that learning process. And then if you're setting up that environment, they'll come to you when they have questions. And I think that's so important, is that when you open up those lines of communication, it's not taboo, it's not scary. It's just a part of your everyday life, everyday home life. Your children know that they can come to you and ask those questions as they grow and mature, and those conversations can start expanding. You have so many resources. We will link them in our show notes. Are there any final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with around mindset, kids, money, investing? Sky's the limit for you.
Oh, it's a fully loaded question actually,
Yeah.
but I would just say, don't procrastinate. Just start talking to your kids about money. And if you have never invested, I suggest, starting small, play around, take $20 if that's, an amount that you feel like, what, even if I lost this, it would be okay. But just do something. I think if you actually put that into action, then you're going to feel much better about investing. You can learn so much. And I just feel like everybody should just try it, try doing it, learn as much as you can. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Maya, for being with us today. This was a great conversation. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sugar Daddy Podcast, yo. Learn how to make them pockets grow. Financial freedom's where we go. Smart investment.